당도 그 단임부터 쉬고네 디바샤바텔라다 어다 당도 타마 그래서 나는 네발을 라미도 톱세디 어딘마 주고래 지나다 타마 네발라미도 톱디 안지기 왜 소스 네마가 주기다 지마디바다 너트디 유중화텔라 너트 중화디 파삼다 너트임바 하고네 다 너트 중샤디 디밀로 대자 마오바나 자오긴 지금에 선배다 네마 제바텔라 너트임바 하고 마오바나 자오 지금에 선배 돔심게 되다 안주기 네발을 라미도 톱세 지금에 선배 돔심이나 양게 네바텔라 지마르와 디네자다 도시네 다 네발을 라미도 톱세 디마 셰게 딘마 티슈고래 님베 톱시 셰사르와.
So good evening. So we've been looking at this chapter primarily on the process of confession through the four opponent powers. And last week we spoke particularly about the power of restraint, or the power of the promise, where having come to recognize something as non-virtuous and understand that from that one oneself will suffer, as well as, of course, harm has come to others, one makes a commitment to not repeat such faulty behavior. The 60th verse in the second chapter. Of past experiences which have all ceased, what of value remains with me now? But by being engrossed with them, I've contravened my lama's teachings.
ngarar cheba di nodri yinba thong che da nyeba di la lar nya jigme sembe tumsim ke bala da nga ju gi nodri yinba di ha go gorwa che sa di sam da tha de sam ka res tang go rasne da sam da tha de ma sung gorwa che sa de ne za da de ya ngun che nyo de shi ba le da la ba chi ji yus da ngun che nyo de shi ba le se da nga ju ke wa nga ma re di nga ma le ya de che sa da ga ri nyo wa re la nga ju gi 코위기 디기 차사라 주다 근데 롱죄 차사 롱죄 말해서 롱죄여래서 다 코위기 아주 코위네 근데 괴다 도로 괴야보다 괴하다 디네 비주 다야라서 봐 괴당 아니 네 강바당 디네 좀 소수게다 뒤행 변조 자다 디네게 차사다 뒤행알야 차사 저기 배제당 요래스고 원체 녀대시 발레세데 다도 진행한 저 삼당하들이 또 제바제데 두수 삼당고를 제바제고래서 오다.
When having generated regret and the power of restraint, when then restraint for engaging in such similar misdeeds again, the promise not to do so, one now comes to this 60th verse. Of past experiences which have all ceased, what of value remains with me now? So the first words there, of past experiences. So this is referring to all the pleasures that we have engaged in. The pleasures not only that we've engaged in, that we've longed for, that we've striven for, and then we indulged in, we enjoyed. So this refers to the wide variety of samsaric pleasures that have consumed us, that have taken up so much energy, pleasures of the senses, clothing, wealth, and so forth, all that we have enjoyed and taken pleasure in. So this is what's referred to, of past experiences.
원체 예마디네게 롱용세는 아주 비슷하요 레시오르와 내내 지게 아사제 기보다 강바야보다 공칭보다 내내가래 내내 아주 비슷하요 레스 안 잔예보다 아니 지게 내내기 두샤다 잔예보다 대주게 미를 통해 제와 잔예바 안지 두차사지 내내기 빠도 매바딩 아주 두신의 롱주요래 뇽요레스 지산 디두차사 가르래람나 내내게다 아주게 롱죄디게 차상 풍선 초바도 요르데 당아주게 di tawa tembu yo mara mi tawa kichi jiru go res chisa da jiru go res da ji ko mi tawa re kichi ji gyuwa ru go res chisa dine za ngwenche dine ke anzu peje mangbo tawa re de dade deso maji baje denu yabu je la de ge jian yo mara ji ba les chasa zo sa me ba cha sa les shi sa re yo mara la yo mara so ngwenche nyo de shi ba les
Here the meditator calls to mind these past experiences, and it's good to recall all that has dominated one in terms of, for example, our appearance, wanting to look good, taking care over what we wear, how we present ourselves, and all the time and effort and worry that we put into our presentation, and not just of ourselves, but of our environment, for example, such as our home, wanting not just to have a nice home, but a particularly nice home. So something that one is quite proud of, in the sense that one is pleased with how it is, but that requires so much time and energy. And likewise with our various possessions within the home, as well as what we wear, our car, and that we make use of, and so forth. As well as then those more obviously of the senses, such as pleasant sounds, so music that we've spent time listening to or perhaps playing, and so forth. All these various pleasures that we've put a lot of energy and physical and mental energy into, and what's left of them? They have all ceased. And this is because they are impermanent. But we put all our energy into them as if there were to be something lasting. But being impermanent, there's now nothing left. They have all ceased.
직 마도 아주 미기 통하기 샤라샤메로 당아 잔두고 말아 지단 또 금전 삼반의 용거래서 다 예수 시월에 준비돼 내게 삼당고래서 돼 어순거와 당한 주가 하고 해야 될이야 나는 주 용회 주되게 돼 세대리네 아주 직 가시기 용원을 양아주 잘라서 모자라서 사바사잖아요. 당아주 모자 사와 휴주에서베다 될이야 디디 그디나 예대버로나 샤고로와 이내 디스마섬다다 로망귀 제로도 간ing버쳐서 달로 조사하지. 매와차들와 지사 고 규르죠. 당보 부이다고 약보 주변에 대만 규어주구주구르지는 간섬질이야 닝버쳐 배주매바 차로데 띵안주게다 잘라래 강바래 당안주기 미 수부로지래 이나 차상안주기 디소안주기 체델이야 되는 연구여바디 안주기 단용을 주기와 차거로와 지산 디네자 디소 차상 답어팀본 매바 미다고 규어주고여바디 당안주기 되는 삼다나 안주기 모소하고 투여로와 지난 디나신다 개왕아망아망아마 되니게 같이 부이다고 같이 준비는 디소 차상 안에 기지기지 지기지 지금 바 매와 차 제산 되네자 달라 하고 지유 나서 제산 되니게 소소려야 이 약보 부이다고 규어마 줘봐 배 약보 되어봐 가를 하여 지요 말서 아 지요 말해서 달라 하고 지유나 되네 요 말로 와서 미도 와서
Moreover here, in the meditation, not only does one call to mind these experiences that we have enjoyed and longed for and taken such pleasure in, but have all of which have ceased, being impermanent, we can also logically establish that we've had lives previous to this. Now, whilst we can't directly observe our lives, but through logic, we can establish that there were lives previous to this. And what possession from even the life immediately prior to this can we point to and still make use of, still gain pleasure of? Not a single possession. And moreover, take particular, call to mind particular objects that you perhaps took great pleasure in or even pride in, perhaps a brand new car. You know, if you have a new car, you take really good care of it, you drive carefully, you keep it clean and so forth. But nevertheless, after some time, you'll care a whole lot less, and eventually it will end up on the scrap heap. That's the case with every car that you have owned, and in fact, all your possessions, as well as each and every body that you abided in lives previous to this. They all have been discarded. And this then is where we see the meaning of the second line. What of value remains with me now? So here, just to repeat, one is recalling all that has passed in this life, but also in lives previous to this. Nothing remains.
Tim chỉ đạo bộ bùi đạo bộ修学吧，等侬bùi đạo bộ下头吧解要嘛的，看还没多好说的，你那个什都现在解吧解都解吧解对，你呢那说的好过过的是我吧当中。
To emphasize this, no matter how much we value something, no matter how great a quality it is or how unique an item it may be, it is impermanent. And therefore, it is subject to momentary change. In the moments that we are taking pleasure in it, it is ceasing. It is becoming or heading towards becoming non-existent. And this applies to all that we value, no matter how much we value, no matter how a greater quality it is momentarily changing, momentarily drawing closer to where it will become non-existent.
착신계제 안에 가르쳐 오르세네 델이야 착신계 안에 직배 착신 디원기 다 만주기 디빌레 뭐 붙이고 해제래 용거레스.
The third line, but by being engrossed with them. So here the focus is now primarily on our mental attitude towards all our past experiences, all these things we've taken pleasure in, whether it is of our bodies or of possessions. All that we have been taken pleasure in, we engage with a mind of strong attachment. We were engrossed with them. In this, and here Shantideva is using a particularly strong word, translated as engrossed or obsessed, to show the strength of attachment with which we've engaged in all our desired experiences, and therefore we can be confident that non-virtue is very likely to have been accumulated.
다 소술야 변조당 우유당 되게 잘라 약보라 취도 갑라 소술야 직델이야 자신께 안델이야 아니 직디 디원기 소소랑 나게 첨보게 현ля 통중 다야다 안데니시도 아니 나게 현ля 통지도 디바치 사고로와 야 디기 소수게 변조도 제라 자신 숙침보게도 디조조서라서 현ля 땅이 현ля 동야 되버 매바지 동두매바 센나제 다디 소소 디 야게 땅에 된다라 양질래가 멍보치 현고고 땅고야 뒤에 현이 된다 고소로서 지우데 디니진에 고 안지게 디 삼다도시 디 마마조에 딜이야 마르조에게 된다라 디니치에 갑라 안 디파시사고 디바사고로와 디바사고로와.
So how does being engrossed or obsessing about our possessions lead to non-virtue? Well, this is a mind of very strong attachment. So this itself then is an affliction, but from it further afflictions arise. What's very possible is pride can arise, because it's something that one values greatly, therefore one is quite likely to reflect the glory of one's possession back onto oneself, and thereby pride arises. And when pride arises, this has an impact on how we relate to others. It changes how we relate to others, in that we will look down on them, see them as, at least in this regard, if not more broadly, as lesser than us, it's beneath us. But not only can pride follow from attachment, so too miserliness, not wanting to put to use what we have to enjoy to be of benefit to others. And this then just leads to our self-grasping, self-cherishing being ever stronger. Moreover, because we are obsessed with this and our other possessions, we have to engage in so much work and energy and activities, always trying to either maintain what we have, and certainly at some point to acquire even more. So in this and so many other ways, non-virtue follows from attachment, especially when attachment is strong, as referred to here.
야지 비슈다야래 샹리아 녀버지야다 샹리아 차와체바 베슈 로바 직당전에 이시게 라셴 니가래 강아몽보 제게 레가 비슈던 거로와 베네 지 지고바서야 디치크런 디치하고래서 데네싱이 무티기세 무티제 네 직대 강아제야라 소바다 데디기다 지고바 여러와드네 지된 지고벌이야 무이제 결혼 디제쇼 선데 지게 제저로와다 내가 로바션에 채워져야 내가 구해야 무이디게 주조선디게 베죠 로바당로와다 근데 지난 데니기다네 지금 여바디게 차상 데니기 지 베죠 로바당 샹리아 안 세외 자와다 샹라 뇌베 자와제게 이见了 데려야 베죠 당지 두스타바이나 운도시네 디기 견제네 아주 디바망고사고로 와제래다 베네레 다 지티로 천체릭 소야다 지 미소야게 천체로 소야 샹레 뇌바기 뇌에게 지게 제망고 소야 안 샹리아 안 지게 강아제야다 뇌비기에 던달라 베셔다제 우치게 튕긴디게 베셔다 여러와 두신 베셔 로바다제 디기제나 저기 베셔데 유에 소수기 규제라 여바디 베셔 로바다제 디기 견장저야 샹레 뇌베 자와 제어도 네 디바망고 사고로 와제래.
Furthermore, when one has a strong attachment to possessions or to whatever it is one takes pleasure in, this leads to, as mentioned, non-virtue in many ways. And that non-virtue leads to harm for oneself, but also to others. We can see illustrations in society where due to strong attachment for something, one is susceptible to being perhaps blackmailed, or one, and therefore led to do something illegal, something one would otherwise not do. And people have even been influenced to engage in extremist activity, terrorist activity, because of being blackmailed, of being forced to do something against their will. So in these and so many different ways, our attachment to our possessions, our wealth, and so forth, leads to harm to ourselves as well as to others.
lam tembo bibe lama sangye kada ngawe lega mangu je bare jigo re ngazo dus je yo re sa je dus shen sam da re ka sa lama de sangye chemde de sangye rang ge lama go re zo sangye da de sangye lama sangye kan kamsum zo semje tham ji yi lam tembe nyamlen ya sangye lam chinju ma lo ba temba jibe lama ane sangye yi ga de kar son ra sene ane nga ju 지게 소수 디버치교 말에 개와주고래 제자다 개와주고래 세제 디버치교 말에 샹리아 녀버치교 말에 소수기 뉴롱주 벤주 여베네 샹리아 펜비 자와주고래 샹이 동아세야다 샹이 아니 디기주비에게 don달이야 당고그래 야 제자 야 아니 건조다 상계다 라마다 상계 야 최고부야 아니 야말 semjelia dunga se den digi dum tuya tandale jimbata yage donale peje taje rangi dosine ke o tupure so sungware chesa de la me so adi 송아들의 도초지고를 당한 주기. 다들 수수기 변조를 된다라야 고소래서 현재 녀바지에 차와지야기 디능아제 제기 두신의 도초차고도 진짜 내매 가당 가와지스 디능이 안줄이 튕기 여바디 배셔다야 디게 튕긴들이야 차신 디왕게 배셔 로바다야라서 봐 두신의 개와 디버바 개어주기 잡라 디버바도 메바사고래 디사바디다 내매 가당 가와리 그래서 내매 가데 도초를 제발해서.
Then we come to the fourth line, just to change one word. I've contravened the Buddha's teachings. So the word lama here, Geshe says, we should understand to mean as the Buddha. So the fourth line, I've contravened the Buddha's teachings. So this follows from being obsessed with or engrossed with our possessions, or engrossed with all that we have strong attachment to. So not just possessions, but broader than that. And this then leads us to acting in a way that's contrary to the teachings of the Buddha. So the Buddha teaches that we should engage only in virtue, and we should do no harm to others. And all that we possess, our skills, our talents, our possessions, we should utilize to bring benefit to others. For example, make offerings to the 3 jewels, to give money to charities that help those are usually animals, but also perhaps people who are facing grave danger, and so forth. This is how the Buddha encourages us to live our lives. But with the foundational instruction of accumulate only virtue, if our mind is dominated by afflictions, such as strong attachment, we will necessarily end up doing the opposite of what the Buddha said. Because as mentioned, from attachment, other afflictions such as pride arises, miserliness arises. And with these afflictions and others such as dishonesty, we take advantage of others, we deceive others, we maybe even steal. So in this way, we end up contravening the Buddha's teachings.
dine du shene jeba je du samdang yu jisa da kar ha gu wo sene oda ngan ju gi nyema ju ge long ju kar ye be ne pun su so ba ka si ye be ne de su cha sa ane ji ge ju ge ji ji bo ju wa me ju wo zhuo ye ba da ba din bu me ba ma do so su rang rang ge de ne long ju de be ya bu le se be da be cha xin ji din bu xi wu dam zhe di该民度是代表这该民度，第二是呢，大部分部民度是一点吧一，然后就龙卷变普通错吧，开始绝备呢，白嘛是第二户的身边大部分部，去年这个昨天没听，昨天没听个，上当呢这个嘛大部分部看下民度啊，给就有入度啊，现在的那个大部分部没把这个两个是定白当都是我们把插花现金，第二俩按这个。你往给按这个山那点里山那些很简里必须萝卜大的那主人多啊三百个三大今天大的来面各当高啊的多的知名度啊地不忙不晒个多其实的知名度是没那这中下今天咱的忙把那亲戚那个那个早给几面三百个的龙觉的了大部店铺金钱安的这个点了我把插花节啊当安的现了那边个教育出来必须萝卜大的早用的这个面是比那每个当改为给教我早用这个面是比三代的到多么结巴是我了。
The reflection on this verse then leads one to the conclusion that whatever I take pleasure in, whether possessions or whatever I enjoy, I utilize all of this. So we could say, whatever I take delight in, I need to remember it is impermanent. And I need to not only remember that, I need to ensure that the way I'm relating to it is that it is as if it is impermanent, not as if it's something that will last. In other words, not to be imposing or imputing a value greater onto it than it possesses. And the reason I have to do this is because otherwise, afflictions such as great attachment, miserliness, taking advantage of others and so forth, will dominate. and I will continue to act in a way that's contradictory to the Buddha's teachings. This is not how I want to live my life. And here we come to the opponent power, where we make the commitment, I will no longer do this. And this then is the power of restraint, where we commit to being far more mindful of our mental process and seeing how we are relating to what we take pleasure in. And when we become aware that we are relating to it as if it were permanent, something really worth striving for and holding on to, we then know we are acting in a way contrary to the Buddha's teachings. And rather, we should be utilizing these things to bring benefit to others.
yoba dijinyel jeba de da jimudus de dinashin chigme sempige da domsam chigorwa de domsam chigorwa jesa da nyabala larmido domsam gyaware da domsam gyawde da di dokchol da garchogorellamna sosolya chige lonchue kareyobene disu chasa takpatim buyo mare se ko mitem bare keji jirugo se mitaba samtaya 안에 대소야 미다바섬 다에 내려야 소소게다 고합예배 소소게 변조의 튕기디 예배 갑텔이야 안에 산예기 가 남에가 송바 나신체네 안 소소게 이 초사 집장제 개발사야다 신이 등원해야 된 디기 주변이야 비주 당고래 송바 나신 소소게 야 라마를 쳐보고 산예나 장시선바다 대술려 쳐부야라서바다 신 안에 진양다 동화세게 지게 동화세에 돈달을 배줬다야 근데 제기 강화세야단 디기 주게기 돈달을 배줬다야 다 되네기 톨래 또 당기 셈비게 삼로디 끼어도 되네 삼로나나 동회 셈바들이 형 동회 셈바 되네 당기 되네 지기 셈비게 미디 디 당기나 되네 당기나 셈비 삼로디도 동회 셈바디 장거로와 지사 대시경 저게 소수기 도저 세나 롱줄레 세나진에 세나 왕기 안디 지거라 당한도 동회 셈바 내용도 근데 세나를 하신 고가요 모르와 되네 동회 셈바 되네 동회 셈바 개화를 와다 네 개화 되네 가제 삼만다 동회 셈바디 개화래 제자 삼로도 숙처저 다등 아주기 파진 주기 냠년단에 진배 냠년세 차고를 되네게 냠년에 야 탈 야 공배도 줘야 차고래 되네게 동회 셈바까지 숙처의 예배 진지 나소수기 튕긴 당화 유나 현랴 뭐소 라린데 정어소 로제 투바다 신유 동화세야다 디기 주야랴 근데 지게 신신 제라바레 지소레 안데술에 팸버 주야게 예체물이야도 신이 강화세야다 신이 디기 주야려도 소설랴 안데 현랴 디기 용화 신이 강화세와 맞에 소설하랴 안데 개와 바도메 바치 치마사고레 디네 제바이나다 라메가다 미가와 라메가다 튠비기래 가지고 그래 제데 제도 루시네 공고래세
To emphasize here in this meditation, restraint follows from regret. These two come together. Well, they're sequential, but both opponent powers are utilized here. Because when one recognizes that this obsessive behavior towards all our desires and our pleasures has led to a non-virtue being accumulated and has led to us contravening the teachings of the Buddha, regret will arise. From regret, restraint will come, the commitment to restrain ourselves from continuing to act in this unskillful and harmful manner. And furthermore, we utilize this as an opportunity to meditate on impermanence, because the fault we've been making comes down to, with our strong attachment, our obsession, we are relating to things that are actually changing momentarily as if they were permanent. Thereby, we give them a value they do not possess. So we reflect here on impermanence. When we notice our mind grasping at something, we remind ourselves, this is ephemeral, it's changing. It will not be able to fulfill my cravings. Then we turn our mind to virtue. to remind ourselves of the Buddha's teachings. Because from regret and restraint, we are committing to no longer contravene the Buddha's teachings. So rather, implicitly, we are also committing to act in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. Which means, whatever I have, whether it's my physical strength, my energy, my possessions, my skills and talents, whatever it is, I will use them in a wise manner. I will utilize them in accordance with the teachings of the Buddha. This is how to live our life. This is how a Dharma practitioner lives their life. So, for example, they'll utilize all that they have to make offerings to the three jewels, to make offerings to ease the suffering of fellow suffering sentient beings. And in this way, by utilizing their skills and talents and energy and so forth, they will be easing the suffering of others. And they will be reducing their own self-centered attitude of miserliness through cultivating the contrary mind of generosity. So in other words, one abandons an affliction through cultivating a virtuous mind. As one develops one's generous spirit, the wish to give of oneself, the self-centered attitude of miserliness, of keeping oneself back, restraining, not utilizing our possessions or our skills and talents to help others, that self-centered attitude weakens through the strengthening of the virtuous attitude of generosity. And as we become ever more focused on easing the suffering of others, then I encourage you to rejoice in this, recognizing this capacity that you are developing in yourself. Recognize each instance of where you ease the suffering of others, because this attitude of rejoicing will serve to encourage you to continue to do so. And moreover, don't only rejoice in the activity, but also that you are acting in accordance with the Buddha's teachings, ever less acting in a way that contravenes the Buddha's teachings, and ever more in accordance with the Buddha's teachings.
Teneke taksen ngazugile di yorwada teneke samtavana taksen di yung mare so da ke lonje kari na de ji na nyama ne ma de ji de ni yuodo mewa cha ru do sambe samta de tene samde na ngazo taksen di shu chung ru res taksen di shu chung ru wan za ani lonje de yela de sena de ke shu chung ru res sena shu chung ru res sa du chine tawa tempo me ba ta ani du chine ani sena chebi che de di ki divasa ge yo ba sanje ka dan ga wa yin ba du chine simju che ba che de de ne ga ha ko yong re de na ha ko de no ju yin ba ha ko de oda ding ji me smbe samlo di ko no ju yin ba ha go yong de da di chen ji me de ji me smbe ge da mao ban zao yin ji me smbe ge dom sem di ko shu che le du ro li go re da dom sem de le ho de ana gar ji ge re na na da ma ji ge du chine dum shu che li ge re se na bo di ba du su shan de ge
The essence of the 60th verse then is that a consciousness, we need to recognize a consciousness that is almost ever present with us, that's almost continuously with us, and that is grasping at permanence, grasping at things that are actually changing momentarily as if they are unchanging. This erroneous, mistaken consciousness leads to a variety of afflictions arising, such as attachment, miserliness, and so forth. So here we need to repeatedly recognize this grasping at permanence and understanding it to be a mistaken consciousness, because this will lead to regret for continuing to be deluded, continuing to follow this deluded consciousness. And that regret then will lead to the commitment to restrain, to be ever more mindful and thereby be able to refrain from coming under the influence of grasping at permanence.
nöbedan tsewe jawala pecho daya da ane rangla ya an jinyo moba kiya shuk cher chaya di yungore chisan deso dikpa di debu de la ane deso la tene taksin la tene nguenshin longche de la mikpeka taksin kichi jiba samado taksin shuk cher chwa taksin de la tene ane karyunga sene longche la shencha di shuk cher chwa shencha di wange dikpa saayado an diki debu dunga yungayado 두치의 용고래 지사 라면 가다 개빌라가 된 용고도 아시베 디하고 고래지 하고 두고래 와다
I want this sequence then to be very clear so that you can incorporate it in your meditations, recognizing this grasping at permanence. In other words, relating to things which are momentary, things which are impermanent, as if they were going to last. Because from this follows our strong attachment, our obsession with things that actually do not possess the value we impute on them. From that then, so from the grasping of permanence comes strong attachment, and from that, thirdly, comes further afflictions, such as pride, miserliness, and so forth. This is all a continuity of non-virtue. Grasping of permanence, strong attachment, and further afflictions. And from these are all expressions or instances of non-virtue, and from non-virtue follows suffering. Whilst these afflictions are present in one's mind, one is also likely to harm others and thereby cause them to suffer too.
미다바리 기지기 지바 주와 주루 베제 삼다에도 엔델에 되네 차신 중화 이 차신 중화에도 랑게 롱주에다 지수자야 현려 동외 선바제디 현려 다야데 소소려 선 차신의 선나 중화는 현려 다야려 아니 현려 판도주야 현 즉 판도주야려 다야려 다투와 연구로 지서 동외 선바디 숙체용아 되네지에도 라메가나신 지게 샹리아 펜버트빅 자와를 비슷하이도 개와사 바델라테네 아란술이야 안체디기네 디기다 개와치마이나야 디기두야리 주 안델레테네 타바다 탐지기 먹고 와토비기 람 귤레기야 타연이야 주요바레 세비기 온두시네 내수다 하고요도 안델야 저게 다디 신전자오기네 되네 지금에 선배 dom심도 숙처리야다 디 도저 냠링이 좀 받이게 어디다 배수진의 제고도 선배 배수진의 숙처리야 돼 용거로 와드네 자데 아주기 다디 지제디게 돈다인 보디 되네게 삼당고에 차고로 와 삼당하다
So many benefits to reflecting on our grasping at permanence. So to drive this point home, here in this meditation I encourage you, reflect on impermanence, because that is the direct antidote to our grasping at permanence. And to the extent our reflection on impermanence grows, our grasping at permanence weakens. This means because from our grasping at permanence follows so many other afflictions, as our reflection on impermanence leads to the weakening of our grasping at permanence, we also turn away from afflictions. Because this reflection, this wisdom understanding impermanence, this is a mind in accordance with reality. And the stronger that is, the more virtue we will accumulate, the less non-virtue we will accumulate. So that should be clear from what's been presented already. But in addition to this, through reducing our grasping at permanence, through cultivating our understanding of impermanence, this enables us to prepare our mind to come to realize reality, realize emptiness. So you should see this meditation as being as part of the sequence of meditations which lead to one to come eventually to realize emptiness. By starting with impermanence, this is a reflection that is in accordance with reality, and it serves to overcome wrong consciousnesses such as grasping at permanence, thereby leads to the afflictions weakening, virtue increasing, and making us our mind more suitable to come to meditate on emptiness. So therefore, this meditation is part of our progression towards the attainment of liberation and enlightenment.
And
In this 60th verse, it refers to our primarily possessions, but body too. But the 61st verse is explicitly in relation to the body. If in a similar fashion to this life, I have to give up friends and loved ones, having to travel alone to places unknown, what is the use of friends and enemies?
소소기 뉴바다 소소기 류라 착비게 나야야당 아니디 나야게 지도 디바사거와 대시 저거 롱줄라 차네 롱줄 나유에서 나야게도 디체로다 대대디 미유도 소소기 류다 소소기 뉴도플레 삼다지네 아니지 나야게도 다선배세디 나야 디바사 니가 소 되네기 랑이 대수 배신 뉴바다 류다 뉴바티 배셔다제 현리아 뇌비 자와 망고체네 디바사 거와 디바사 지산 디바사에도 선체 디다 디신도 세데 대신도 선 대시 강을 셰바나시 안라메 디바 망보사 라메 가다 가이베기 나 자와 망고 지고 제바 지고래 에세지 디스월 두신에 삼당고래서다.
The meaning of the 61st verse is very similar to the 60th. So in the first line, if in a similar fashion to this life, so we start here to relate to our body that has been, maybe less so now, but certainly when we were younger, was quite strong, quite energetic. People perhaps wanted to be around us, have us include us in their circle and so forth. So the way, especially when you're younger, it's more obvious, but throughout, we have a strong attachment towards our body, towards our strength and our energy, that I can do this and I can do that. And that attachment itself is non-virtuous, but it leads to further afflictions arising, such as pride, seeing ourselves in an exaggerated way, and thereby separating ourselves from others, keeping separating us, preventing us from feeling close and connected to others. Also leads to competition with others. So these and other ways, non-virtue arises, non-virtue is accumulated in terms of how we relate to our body, to our physical aspect.
long ama ding ama di ya jiang ama si de da din xie de shen bei che ring le ya jing ang zhe ge bei wang xie qian bu nu wei qian bu su do bu ya bu xu re jing ang zhe ge wa lian yo de ba de de jiu wo ye chung yu de ya bo le chung yo de ba de da de ne ge ya bu chu bei ka bu ya da ji bei ji dang ang zhe ge da shen shu qian bu bing ang zhe ji ye yu ne me de ge ko da bu dian bu shu shi rin bei san le当过的话，其实的那个大部分不开要嘛的话，是大部分不开要嘛的。可是的那速度轻薄的，女不轻薄呢，给你就会贴近娘路的话，女不没法拆的。当部分的这个 야저 소소라랑게 원체 침부 니버 침부 코르먹고 여반에 양글리글리진데 때답고 띵부카야 미다발에 글리글리진 코르메기 메바차도 소소 원체 메바 니버차 메바차드는 유루고로 와서 진짜 저게 삼노나려야 딱바 띵부데 유어기는 줘야 메대시 오체 삼당 딱신기 따진디게 나야디와 녀모다 배시 로바다네 디바모 사고레스 라메다 가단게 velaka 먹무치고레스 심주 약보 제바이나 나중에 류다 니바 첨부 슉첨부 코르막 보시고 여배나 디수차사 미다바를 유어주고레스 내가 되네면 그리게 유르지는 한가에 봐 차르고레스 이게 수부디게 교보 냠타바 코리오디게 메가 되네게 냠다바 차르고로 왔는데 차르고 그래서 미다바 지고 유르고로 왔어 자 디송거다 되네 쇠배 세트네 여바이나 디소 한두스 배지를 받는 디바사고레스 제자다 디소 답을 띵부 여마레 계지계지 지바레 제상 유어주고레 사제 또 두시네 나중에 뭐라서 맞아트르는 거로
Here we reflect on our lived experience in this life, and we also knowing that there were lives previous to this, we can use our imagination to imagine that in lives previous to this, we would have been strong, we would have been attractive, others would have wanted to be around us, perhaps we had great charisma. So whatever our situation has been in this life, there would have been lives previous to this where our situation was amongst the elite in terms of our attractiveness and our charisma. But just like in previous lives, that was lost, so too in this life, we need to recognize that our situation is not at all stable. We look at our body, our physical state, as well as our energy and our capacity, as well as in our charisma, those who wanting to be with us, etc. Those who wanting us to be as part of their circle, and so forth. And recognize that this entire situation is fluid. It's changing. Not in the way that we relate to things. We relate to them as if they are permanent, as if they are lasting. Hence our surprise when a situation changes. So again, this is an illustration of grasping at permanence, even though what we are grasping at is impermanent. And from this mistaken consciousness of grasping at permanence follows affliction such as attachment. And thereby we bring harm to ourselves, and when it's expressed, we bring harm to others. So this we need to recognize. We need to recognize that all that we have, that we value, in this context, our body, our energy, our charisma, and so forth, this is fading, it's passing, it's impermanent, and we will have to give it up. As we saw in the previous verse with the term ceased, it will all cease.
Geshe Thubten Rabten, 지상한 님이지 아니 되네게 마 뉴바바 교화치 뉴바 촌촌치 뉴바 냠 되네 가슴질야 시주고래 시도도 갑라 안에 소수요 코르망 부연나 분년게 님망 부연나 차상 티에제어 말세 티티요 마 차상 샤샤고래 빵네 샤안도고래 소수요 규자라이네 차상 샤샤도고래 년나 코르망 부시고 주변에 차상 빵네 샤샤지 소수 지부 아니 지게 Geshe Thubten Rabten 유신 대신다 지리야 아니 변해 가족이 개와 치마 파 되는 조고래 시고 조고래서 지고다 되는 조비 갑라 아니 지니다 코라다 뭐가지 예배네 뒤쳐서 샤샤 조에마도 지야해야 말레스 티야요 말레스 엔소수기 류롱주 뉴바 수기 뉴바티 차가리 예배네 차사 소소소부디에 바샤샤 조고마도 지수 지부다 누이바 첨보다 가지나 디님도 캐줘야 가요 말해서 제사다 된디기 빠지는 소소 남시 지부다 개와 치마 근데 가와 조빈데 들려야 늦지 조고래 해지래.
This continues with the second line. I have to give up friends and loved ones, so reading them together. If in a similar fashion to this life, I have to give up friends and loved ones. Here we recognize that our body, including not just the coarse body, but our strength, our energy, as well as our companions, such as friends and loved ones, every aspect is declining. There is this process of impermanence. There's constant flux, despite how we relate to it. And in the end, this process of decline will lead to our situation ceasing. So if we tie this with the previous verse, which was focused, whilst not solely, but more on possessions, we also see that just like our possessions will decline and cease, so too our physical capacity, as well as our companions. And when this experience, this life, comes to an end, we continue, but our continuum continues alone. All our possessions, no matter how cherished, no matter how hard we had to work for them, are left behind. Our projects, those things we put so much energy into, whether completed or not, are discarded, as is our body, as are all our loved ones. And even if we, in this life, have strength and power and influence, it's of no use now. We progress entirely alone. And we progress in the direction that our karma dictates.
Shi Chode Kabla, that's Ada Misa Kunchi Rung, Chesa Sosanga, Sempiring, Yangi, Punjare, Ni Kor, said Chicken Naja, that in all the dinner Naja, Shuchi, Chitelia, and the dozen Sungchet, Chik Jabats in Tuatiki, to go the Ina, Shi Kabla, the Sugar Kanki, Julia, Chipandochi to go Marese. Zada Misa Kunji Zawa Sosugi Yeda Dropoti Casina Yumdu Sosuga Yumdu Duanya Yultaya Consum Goshigati Yultaya Yomade Manjum the George Robotia Yomade Seki Zada Misa said the social Sumbi Nagalia Sosugi chicken Sosungi Taore and Sosu Mitubatikida she wake up like a Shayama Tsugi and as New Year's Kayamades or Zada Misa Kangia Kaya Jin Kunchi Rung Kangia, and so Samigi Anzulia, Karchia, Chair Kayo Marwa, Pando Kayo Marwa, that I miss Kunchi Rungs.
The verse concludes with the final two lines. Having to travel alone to places unknown, what is the use of friends and enemies? Here then the reflection is recalling how much time and energy we put into our relationships. But at the end, they will all be left behind. And here one thinks of the time and energy one's put into our friendships with our family, as well as with those, the time and energy we put into with regard to those that we despise, our enemies. How much energy went into thinking about those situations, talking about them. But in the end, it will all be left behind. And thinking like this helps to bring a balanced perspective so that we can engage in a life in a more balanced way, seeing what is worthwhile and what is not.
Dusene Danga Zigi, Sumbe Celia, Sosu, Zubuya, Sosolia, Kormambo, and Denigi, Nubachembo, Sheba Inaya, that is so Tabatimbe, Tazin, Tabatimbaina, and the Jig, Yuameba, Gidina, Dendu, Denjara, Dara, Niguba, some Daja, Tabatimbaina, Dasenje, Diwange, Sosoge, Nubana, Sosu, Luda, Soso, Kola, Chapake, Diwange, and the Chelia, Nube Chawa, and Tsawache, Diwamang Posagdus, just Diwamon did no Turishas. Deniche de la Megada, Gawar, very like Lama, said the Sanyu Jumnandiki, no Jumache said the Antulia, Sanyu Jumne, so the Shelia, Tawamaje, Shelia, Pember to Bore, so Dibachi Yomare, Gawadupore, Sadi, Dele Tosho, Lachidus, Tisha, the Timidus, the Tim, the Dinizada, the Nigi, Mahomba, the Nigi Lagade, that Rangi, Luida Nubala Chashin Gia, and the Jigga doesn't double Zimba, Chashin Diwangi, Shenlia Nube Jawa Jigm, Tizao in the Jigmea, Sembegi, Duchin, Jigmebe, some Domsum Gia, Duchin, Jebacha, some done, that did Jigmin, the Jigme, Simbe Domsum Gia or Esoda.
In this verse 2, then, what we need to challenge within ourselves is this grasping at permanence, grasping at situations, material things, as if they are unchanging, grasping at a situation, an event, words, possessions, a body, as if it's unchanging. That consciousness is not in accordance with reality, and therefore, of course, affliction such as attachment will follow, and therefore, of course, harm will be brought to others. Here we need to recognize this process, not merely intellectually, but to see the role that it plays in our life. We need to see this in meditation, we need to see it when it's in action, and recognize this is non-virtuous. This is causing me to suffer now and in the future, as well as causing others to suffer. Moreover, we recognize that this is contrary to the Buddha's teachings. The Buddha taught, do no harm. Accumulate only virtue. This is the guidance the Buddha gave us to live our life. But we need to recognize here how much of our energy, how much of our life has been spent contrary to that. This then will lead to regret. And as mentioned at the beginning of the class, from regret comes restraint. This is what we're looking for. The strength of the restraint is dependent on the strength of the regret. To have strong restraint is required in order to start to break strong habitual patterns. Therefore, to bring about strong restraint, we need to generate strong regret. This will conclude then with the determination to no longer act in accordance with these harmful karmic tendencies, but to now rather act in accordance with the Buddha's teachings.
And the samdha that the change in the Shigme and Bigeta Thompson Giado, Tana Garchiore Lambda, Tangazuki, Sempe, Sosuku, Supertetan, Yubi Cablina, Rangi Corpus over Yubi Chasalia, and this way. Tapatimbo Yomba, Midaba, Kiji, Yudugores, and Midaba, Tapatimbo Midaba sometime. The name Midaba sometime, Sosulia Chashin Shundra. The Nigi Sosuran Rangida, Lu, that the Punson Sopa, Lu Devoda, Chasan, Nuba Yudi Cablia, Sosugita, Sanjiki, Lamden Chishabanashi, Nazu Kivechawakan, to the Tugin Sempe Kivechawa, Tavachia, Sambachia, Gomjadi, Besuchin, Chigin Sempeda, Nyamnecha, Chiache. That image Rangi, Luida, Tungian Chasa, Chike, Nuba Yube Cablia, Shenlia, Pembigi, Shengi Dunga Sea, Shengi Tigutualia, Pembe Jawa, Gang to the Chigin Sempegi, that is some Dachang to Titolia, and the Gang to the True Warriors, Yamlenche Warriors. Dijabaina, Tangazu Giawachima in Cedele, Cedigi, Tungian, Nuba Chembota, Super Deta Yobadi, Beja Yanta was Tangora, Lami, Lamasan Jumlen, Yusun Shabanajin, Gashin the True Warriors. Beja Yanda, what I would get down Rangi and Sosa, Tipchan, and the Gawa Yakosagore, Shenli, Pemba to you, Shengi, Dunga said that Shengi, Ganga, Digi to the Shenli, Pemba Jakungore, the Nigi Yamnedu Chibana, Yamnedu Shukcher, the Gawa Chima in the Tiguraya, and the Tarbata Temji Bokobadi, Taranya to Warriors, tis not Dushin the Warriors, and some let in it down, Yamlinche, the Samnal, two species Tangore said that some Tata to do slip the Jessiuala Chimbigi that the CJT and that is Sungorva.
The conclusion we come to in this reflection, the conclusion that Shantideva is leading us towards, is to, through our meditation, to develop the mindfulness, the awareness perhaps, throughout our day, to relate to everything that appears to us as being impermanent. our time, our energy, our possessions, our body, not grasping at it as if it was unchanging, but to recognize the fluidity of the situation that we keep encountering, that situation that we find ourselves in. It's fluid, it's changing all the time. This then will lead to a much lighter attitude, much lighter way to move through our days, not grasping so tightly, but being more relaxed in how we utilize our energy, our time, our body and possessions. This will then help us to live in truer accordance with the Buddha's teachings. Particular, if we take this an abbreviated presentation, I will do no harm, and wherever I can, I will be of help. With the mind being lighter and freer, moving, relating to things as being changing momentarily, as being fluid, it will be much easier then to give of our time and of our energy to others, to utilize our body, our physical capacity, as well as our possessions, to be of benefit to others, and at the very least, to bring no harm. And in this process, because we are acting ever more in accordance with reality, we will have a better understanding of our capacity and not be so confused, thinking there's not much we can do, but we will have a clearer understanding of just how great our capacity is, but still not go beyond that, so we can be able to give of ourselves continuously without getting worn out. So the clearer this meditation is on the abandonment of grasping at permanence, the stronger will be our resolve to change this habitual way of engaging, and rather to be ever more consistent with behavior that is in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. So hopefully this is clear, that from this way of thinking on the topic of impermanence, radical change can follow. And this will lead us to making great strides towards the eventual attainment of enlightenment itself.
Dondala da diniga tsikta de sinyal shiva tsikchi niga ge donda de dangbo de la ma zu longjues niba de rang lu dang course. Chisa dondala rang lu dang longju rang longju phu so ba longju de ge da an rang lu dang khola so ba chasa takwa timbo yo mare dine kiji kiji yuo ruo re sebege du chine metaba sam dang go re se orda metaba sam du sam da dine sam da de dine rang lu longju la chashin ma ge ba je delya an chi ge chashin ge ba de no chu re chasa di je ni di be cha ba che ba la me ka dang ga go re chasa dine sa za wa yin mo dine ki za wa yin ji me sam be ge dom sim ge ne dine rang gi da lu longju lui long ju pun so ye ba da rang an lui de ge de ka so lui de bo an de ge ko de ge yong a de ya bo yong a de di ne ka so da de su cha sang be je de xian ya rang gi nyam len che ya ge ge wi nyam len che ya ya be je da ya da xian sem jian de di ge zhu ye dong a se ya le be je dang yi san be ge dong yue san ba jiang dong yue san ba jie di dong yue san ba jian ne an do shi ne sang ye ge ke song xie be lam le ya le gu ho le sang yi lai me ga dang ga na xin zhu gu le du xian dong yue san ba jiang jie ne ge yue jia wa de gang tu de zhu gu le sai de dong ne ning bu de di le da ci do ju xu xia wen na.
To summarize the essence of both of these verses then, all that we have, so taking everything that we utilize, our possessions and so forth, everything that we utilize, but not just what possessions in the sense of what we own, but all that we utilize, as well as then our body, our friends, our loved ones, and our enemies too. All of this we should relate to as changing momentarily, as being impermanent. To be able to do so also involves the recognition that we actually relate to all of these as if they are permanent. As we need to recognize for ourselves, so that we can gain some freedom from this grasping at permanence, grasping at these things as existing in a way they just do not. To the extent we recognize this, we'll start to let go. We will become a bit freer. We'll also then recognize the errors, the mistakes that we have made, and regret will naturally follow from that. And to the extent that we recognize this, restraint will arise. And that restraint won't be fleeting, but it will have a strength that will enable our mindfulness to be aware of when we're making that same old error of grasping at permanence, and rather relate to situations and things as being impermanent, as they are. This then brings us ever closer to the teachings of the Buddha. Or to express it differently, this brings us ever closer to living in accord with the teachings of the Buddha. To present the teachings in a very simple way, or a very abbreviated way rather, the outcome here would be that we utilize all that we have at our disposal, our body, our energy, our skills, our talents, our possessions, we utilize in a way that brings no harm. That's ethical restraint. But wherever we can, we utilize them to bring benefit, and that's generosity.
The shula and to Yaman Chehova, the shul, think about the Sigmos and Yaman Chehova, and also Lamdoa, Chisadi, Duanlea, then also Carjosne, Doccho, Unity, then the notary session, Unity session. The Unity said the Doccho, the Yandela, the other Unity, Chego Marason, the Doccho, the Yandini Chehova, session, Rashu, the Ligorva, Chisadiza, Dina, the Signal, Monjin, the Shiba, Dala, Haba, Giana. Dani della Munshine, la Megata Gawaches. Does that Dondale? Then when your mother launched about the Mebas long Mawjers, and that's your high, she said, that the carrying answer, Dala Habaj, the Carlayo, as such. She said, Dinner that they launched la Chavashin, Chashin Gage, and La Megata gave it the woman which here, as such. And did the next word. She said, Dinner that the Digmundu, no duration, didn't change our Jimmy, Sevi Thompson do. That did also carry. Longe Tamje, Tawa Timbo Meba, Kiji, Chibe Rashi, and there you be Cablia, and the Newcastle, Divasabi Cholamataji, gave it, Delia, Chashin Makiavaji, Senama, Chashin Makiam, Senama Jevaji, don't wear somebody, Gom, and Shelia, and she Chevapuata, Shelia, Pembe, Jawa to be a Digi to be a Rashan, Niga, Digi to be a Gava to be a Lamyaneji in Palapesha, Tangore, Sepe, Tangi in Sempege, some no do some dancing as a Tangore, Sachi. Don't I know what it was that caught 637. Tamboti, Geshe.
Hopefully, you're seeing from how I approach this and other verses that one needs to take one's time and think about the meaning. In this way, so much that the intent of Shantideva becomes clear. So looking at the first verse again that we looked at tonight, the 60th verse, of past experiences which have all ceased, what a value remains with me now? But by being engrossed with them, I have contravened my Lama's teachings. So here this is explicitly pointing out faults that we have done. So here Shantideva is firstly explicitly saying, look within. Look for the faults. You are bound in samsara. And being bound in samsara, the faults are multiple. You need to recognize them firstly. So that's what's explicitly mentioned. Implicitly, what is stated is, and you therefore need to practice. And the literal word for practice, gain experience, which means you need to engage in the opposite, engage in accumulation of virtue. You first need to recognize the fault so you know what it is to abandon. And then you engage in the virtue, which is the process of abandoning through the accumulation of the opposing, the opposite consciousness. So when it says here, what a value remains with me now, as mentioned there, you think very broadly of everything that you desired, strove for, perhaps obtained or perhaps never obtained, and recognize what you have now. All that we realistically can point to is an accumulation of imprints from the afflictions that arose at that time. That's all that's left. Whatever we are striving for, whether it was reputation, a particular skill, a possession, whatever it may have been, it's long gone. It has long ceased. All that's left are the imprints of our minds that were involved with desiring, chasing, perhaps competitive. This is all that remains. This we need to recognize. If you want, a companion thing to recognize is that where we have put energy into fulfilling our own self-centered obsessions, in each instance, we have missed opportunities where we could have been better, where we could have been of benefit. Instead of striving for our own desires, that same energy in that same situation, with a broader outlook, a more expansive mind, we could have actually engaged with others in a beneficial manner. And that then brings one to a conclusion here in terms of training one's mind to develop and be guided by a generous spirit, this wish to give of oneself in all ways to be of benefit, and to abandon the contrary self-centered attitude of miserliness, where we hold all our skills and talents and our time and our energy for ourselves first and foremost.
Gidina negative doesn't get Delia Chata, Chashin Ye, Diwan Gan Chanlia, Unebi Chavat, Denishan Tipa Mongosago, Didigio Maresage, do some time. Denigate, Dundala, Denigi, a Shidro de Cabla, Yen, Korta, Chasan Carina, Chijo Mares, Zawata, Yen Garina Payo, so Shibujo, Essage, Donati that is Shula, and the Dundala Kangan Karanyam Chorasine, at the Delia, Dini Pamia, but the Dinigim. Chidenda, Irangi, Lu Punson Sobata, and Devo Tambo Yubi Gablia, the Amita Gedina, Dinashin Tuyama Gedina, Image Medra, and Yangayo, Tambo Devo Yubi Gablia, Socio Gomja, Yamnakazina, Chigi, Sempiki, Gom Yamlelia, Bishop Nayada, Socio Lutiki, Tambo, Corpus Soba Yubi Gablia, De Bishop Naya, Shenlia, Digi said, the Shengi Digi, Juviata, Ganga Celia, and the Bishop Tangi, Sempe, some Tongue Samba, Duchene, Deniga Sam Daje, Geshe Thubten Rabten Gawagang to Jupuri, Sache, that don't die Nimbo, Lady, and some die do Stanguri, or Dangaje, Korda, Dan Socio Longe in Aja, Socio Luda, and Jitsu Devo Tamba, so Nuba, the Korda Chasa, Giji Gibi, Midaba, some Dane, Dene Delia, and Dasen Makiabache, and Chashin Makia Majuba, Desu Chasa, and Yashelia. Rangi Digi Jubia, the Georgia, Chol Tayata, Shen Digi Jubiata, Dunga Sega Cholia, Tangi Sempi, Tamja Shachene, and it count to the pitch that Tanguri said. Do so then Yamlenche, this some not done, Dustin, some died, then Yamlenwada. Yamlenche said, this some of the Yane and the Dang, Gomshu Chertayana, D20 Dang also count to the Latin tattoo at the chatting, then Yamle said, this worried.
Then the 61st verse again. If in a similar fashion to this life, I have to give up friends and loved ones, having to travel alone to places unknown, what is the use of friends and enemies? Shantideva is employing the same technique, where he is guiding us to look at our faulty way of relating to our body and other people too, and recognize this fault. And it's important to keep recognizing our faults so that we can have the determination to slowly change our way of thinking. So all the way that we relate to our body relating to it in a way that it does not exist, relating to it as a way that is permanent, that its qualities, its characteristics are permanent, as if this strength or this health will remain when it cannot. That if we are attractive or physically impressive, this too fades. Then our relationships with others, the friends who accompany us, these change. But not only that, because of our relating to things in a way that they do not exist, with this grasping at permanence, and thereby a mind that is uptight, the afflictions abound, attachment, competitiveness. Therefore we suffer, therefore we create the causes for further suffering too, and harm to others. So this is what's more explicitly mentioned. Implicitly, similar to the previous verse too, we recognize that all that we've had has passed. All that we have now will pass. It is passing each moment. And all that remains of what has ceased are those imprints that were accumulated in relation to them. So perhaps in relation to friends or enemies, we had attachment, we had anger. Those relationships are perhaps long gone. Certainly they have changed. But those imprints, they abide on our consciousness. This is all we are left with. From those friends or those people we despised that we haven't seen or heard from for years. What's left are those imprints. This is what we still have to bear. So here we recognize the situation. That's what is more explicitly presented. Implicitly is how to practice. Grasping at permanence is a mistaken consciousness. It's overcome by reminding that these phenomena are impermanent. They're changing momentarily. What are we grasping at? The moment we grasp that, it's already gone. All that we've had has already ceased. We wasted our time grasping at it, longing for it, wanting it to remain when it cannot. So rather than, the way to practice is practice wisely. Reflect on impermanence. Reflect that all that we have. There's no need to grasp at it. It is changing momentarily whilst I have it in my possession. Whilst I have it, that I can make use of it, that I can influence it, I'll put it to use wisely. In other words, I'll use the energy I have, I'll use the skills I have, I'll engage with my friends, and even those that I currently dislike, wisely, and in a way to bring as much benefit as possible. So in particular, let go of the afflictions in how we relate to ourselves, as well as how we relate to others. And tying with what was presented earlier, our possessions and wealth too. Don't relate to them in a way that is discordant with how they actually are. Rather, use our intelligence and relate to things as impermanent, and therefore, without grasping, utilize all that we have access to bring benefit.
아니 닝한 저기 다 되는 도시네 제바체 삼나다 도시네 제바체 삼다에도 아니 너트리 바데 교인 하고 그래서 교인 하고는 니 지금에 셈비 dom심리 그래서 다 지금에 셈비 dom심리에도다 교인 바데 지금에 dom심리에도다 제화에 가래세비기다 독초디 아니 계획 자체디 라슈기 제제에게 되는 게 두바티고 그래서 지난 당보 제바체 뭐 신고를 마신바이나 디 dom심대 하고 리고 말에 디 마신바이나는 dom세대 하고 기바도나 디 도초 니 계획 자와디 제해디 되는 게 두바디 슈치 뭐 기도 말에 두바디 되는 게 두바 슈치 마게나 디네 자왈 좀 말에서 지난 디네서 제바체 심주체 삼다에디 예침부를 세대랑은 삼단 게 두치는 삼단고를 제바디네 제고래 디네 삼단 제바체나 디 하고 그래 디네 dom심기도 그래 디네게 dom심기도 디 도초디 아니 냠는 지야디 밀라렌다도 그래 세지 송에 디슨 거로다 도나 닝보디 디리도와
Key point to take away then is that in these verses, as well as elsewhere, where the presentation is very focused on faults within. This you should take up and look for those faults. It's important to recognize one's faults and not to shy away from that, but to recognize the role they play, the harm that they have brought and will continue to bring. This is important. May feel unpleasant, but it is important because that will lead to regret. We will see an aspect of our way of thinking that we would rather not have. That is a mind of regret. And the stronger it is, the stronger the resulting mind will be, that of restraint. And the restraint is that determination, or can be translated often as promise, that determination to turn away from harmful habitual tendencies. That needs to be a strong mind, because we are trying to uproot deep-seated habitual ways of thinking, ways that just naturally arise and are followed, believed, and have been for lifetimes. We need strength of mind in order to change these habits. That strength of mind follows from this determination to change, this restraint, which follows from seeing clearly our faults and generating regret. The outcome of that single meditation will be a strong determination. But if one's skillful in including these meditations, reflections on impermanence, for example, the mind is light, it's joyous. And that is another key aspect. The mind needs to be joyous and light for that strength of mind not to weigh us down. And thereby, continuously we can be mindful of our mental process or aware of our mental process and ensure it remains in accordance with the Buddha's teachings. So thank you. We can conclude there for tonight, but if there are questions, then feel free to ask.
I have a question.
Sure.
If we are using our minds to grasp at things we enjoy, will we also be using them to grasp the things we don't like as well?
So if we're using our mind to grasp at things that we enjoy, are we also using our mind to grasp at things we don't like?
Yes.
Yeah?
It's not a great way.
No, I understand.
Yeah.
So entirely right. What has been described here has been mostly, except in the second verse where it's spoken about enemies, has mostly, other than that, has all been towards things we like. But the presentation, the way of responding is identical to what we dislike. We strongly, I'll use a different word here, strongly engage with what we desire, but we also strongly engage with what we despise. The one we want to pull and hold close, the other we want to push away. So this engaging with it is the same. Yeah, we're wanting to do something different with it. One is push it away, the other is pull it close. But the advice is the same. So both one relates to as permanent when it's impermanent. The enemy and the friend. Yeah, or that relationship is a better way to put it. This person we despise, this is a person who's always awful. That's the permanence. So the advice is equal, or the training is the same for what we despise as well as what we desire. Okay.
mi jiglane shimbure, jiglane shimbuyo mare, rwa, jiglane da bambaro chagora. Chizan shimbu sayade soso rangi nyongne soso ge jikjishi ge zhochi nyongche, soso ge delia debar juna shimbu tu sajora. Soso debar majuna shimbu nese, chizan kala shimda mashim sayade soso debar kala leti gasar tuwa shimjura chen.
So with things that we both like and dislike, the way the mind engages with it, in some ways is very different, pulling towards, pushing away. But what's beneath, what's beneath that is the same, this grasping. And another way that one can think about it, we spoke tonight about relating to things as being lasting or permanent, when they are actually changing momentarily. Another way to relate to things is to recognize that the way we relate to something, and or to express it differently, the way we believe something exists is not how it exists. How can we be sure of that? Because someone else will look at that exact same thing and experience it very differently. A particular type of food, you really like it, someone else despises it, cannot stand it, can't eat it, someone else indifferent. The same thing. This shows the way we relate to things is not how they exist. And when we reflect well on that, the mind becomes very light. Just like when we reflect on impermanence and we recognize that something is changing. What are we clinging to? What are we grasping at? Because it's already changed. Thank you.